Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Arnie Eisen, the Chancellor of JTS, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Bernard G. Segal Memorial Lecture in Law and Ethics, which will be delivered this evening by noted attorney Kenneth R. Feinberg. His topic will be, What is Life Worth? Tailoring the Law to Meet the Challenges of Unique Catastrophes. For those of you who are here for the first time, I want to invite you to frequently come back to JTS. We have a whole series of public programs. Get in our mailing list. We'd be happy to have you. I'll tell you about some of them at the conclusion of this program. And there's a ritual in this institution and every other at this moment. We're thinking of inventing a bracha for it. But please, at this moment, silence your cell phones so that we can all enjoy the lecture. You know, this evening's topic is, for JTS, not just any old topic for any old lecture, but this place has been uniquely committed to the study of law and ethics ever since its founding. I could summarize it very broadly by saying that for Jews, going back to the Torah, there was a conviction that ethics gets serious when it becomes law, that principles become weighty when they're translated into nitty-gritty action in the here and now, and that kind of action has to be specified in law and has to be enforced by law. JTS has also been interested in law because it's our conviction that Torah is not meant to be put on the shelf but lived now. And in order to take a code written at least 3,000 years ago and apply it now, that code has to be interpreted. It has to be made relevant to new details. It has to be pertinent to the most difficult ethical decisions we face, which is exactly the topic of Ken Feinberg's talk this evening. I'm pleased to announce to you all, I don't think it's public knowledge yet, that JTS has just gotten approval from the Board of Regents of New York State for a new MA program in Jewish ethics, which will be inaugurated this coming fall, which will give new force to our longstanding conviction that ethics is at the center of what we do here. And it will enable students to specialize in various kinds of professional ethics, as well as to engage Jewish ethics in their personal and professional lives. To learn more about the program, there'll be a sign-up sheet outside the auditorium after the lecture, or of course you can just keep in touch with us by email. And now I want to speak a little bit about Bernard G. Segal. This annual memorial lecture was established by JTS in honor of the late Bernard G. Segal, a philanthropist and community leader in my hometown of Philadelphia. Mr. Segal was the first Jewish president of the American Bar Association and the first Jewish chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association. Aside from my kinship with Bernie Segal because we shared the title Chancellor, I have been hearing about Bernie Segal since I went to Central High School in Philadelphia, his alma mater, and then again at the University of Pennsylvania, his alma mater, and then he was honored at the Hebrew University, one of my alma maters, and I feel like of all the distinctions that he got, I'm privileged to follow in these several footsteps of his. Bernie Segal had a long time, notable career with the law firm of Schneider, Harrison, Segal, and Lewis. He carried on special assignments for Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. He worked tirelessly to extend the influence of the organized bar in matters of legal policy nationwide. He was recognized for his, quote, indefatigable efforts to expand and improve legal services for the poor, the powerless, and the dispossessed. In addition to this evening's annual lecture, his support for JTS, which awarded him the honorary Doctor of Laws degree in 1977, has been recognized through the naming of the Bernard G. Segal Seminar Room in our Kripke Tower. And I'm really pleased to recognize at this point Bernard Segal's grandson, Mr. Mark Cohen, who's joining us tonight, and also the presence of Mr. Bruce Rosenfield, a former law partner of Bernie Segal, and to thank him for helping bring this program to fruition. Mr. Ralph Snyder, also a former law partner of Bernard Segal, unfortunately could not be here with us this evening, but we want to thank him for his role in this lecture. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Ken Feinberg, who has just made me swear not to introduce him in any length, so I'm not going to read you at least 50% of the material that's in front of me. But Ken Feinberg is still in the middle of a long and distinguished career. Most relevantly to tonight's talk, he has been appointed to administer numerous high-profile compensation programs, having served as Special Master of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund and the Agent Orange Victim Compensation Program. He was appointed by President Barack Obama as administrator of the Gulf Coast Claims Facility to compensate victims of the 2010 BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the largest environmental disaster in United States history. He was also appointed an administrator of the Aurora Victim Relief Fund and the Hokie Spirit Memorial Fund in response to the shootings in Aurora, Colorado in 2012 and at Virginia Tech. And currently, he's serving as administrator of the One Fund Boston Victim Relief Fund, established to benefit the victims of the 2013 Boston Marathon attacks. Earlier in his career, Mr. Feinberg served as a law clerk for Chief Judge Stanley H. Full, New York State Court of Appeals, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York, and Special Counsel, U.S. Senate Committee on Judiciary, Chief of Staff to Senator Edward M. Kennedy. Following Mr. Feinberg's lecture, as you see from the microphones, there will be time for a question and answer session. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to call to the podium Kenneth Feinberg to deliver tonight's lecture.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Chancellor for that introduction. You know, the only thing wrong with that introduction, he didn't mention my book. My book that came out last year, Who Gets What? Financial Compensation in Times of National Tragedy. Now, you may have trouble finding that book today. Public Affairs Press, 2012. Don't worry. My personal supply of that book is virtually inexhaustible. So if anybody has trouble, just ask the Chancellor and we'll get you a copy. I'm really here for three reasons. First, the opportunity to deliver a lecture at this great, internationally renowned institution. I know this institution for the past 40-some-odd years, since my former boss, Chief Judge Fuld of the New York State Court of Appeals, was chairman of the board of this great institution, and that was my first visit here around 1970. Second, to pay tribute to Bernard Segal. I'm a lawyer. We all in our profession revered and looked up to Bernard Segal. He was a mentor of mine, and I was in Washington and New York when he was practicing law in Philadelphia. My old boss, Senator Kennedy, would get requests from all sorts of people to visit with him. Bernard Segal, always, let him in. I want to see Bernard Segal if he has something to say. And the door was always open. My being here tonight to pay tribute to this great American, this great lawyer, I'm honored, frankly, to be asked by the family and others to perform this task this evening. And the third reason I'm here is that I anticipate that this is a very sophisticated crowd. And I think this crowd will understand better than most some of the problems you confront when you're asked by Congress or a president or a governor or a mayor or a judge to distribute compensation and to design a system to distribute compensation. And there are some very, very provocative, important, critical issues that arise when you're asked to do this. And we will discuss this together tonight for a few minutes. Now, my son, Michael Feinberg, who practices law right here in New York, and his wife, Taryn, they have heard all of this before. I think the main reason my son's here, frankly, CLE credit. He'll get some CLE credit. So, and the other person I must mention is my colleague, who has been at my side for every one of these programs, going back to Agent Orange in the 1980s, my colleague Camille Byros, who is here tonight. And it's great that she's here because somebody here will go to the mic and ask a question, I guarantee it, where I will say, Camille, you did it. You designed these programs. You administered them. So we'll look to her maybe as a resource because there's nothing you can ask tonight that she hasn't had to deal with during the past 35 or 40 years. So thank you. Now, here's the thesis, you see. Every once in a while in American life, not often, there is a tragedy. And the tragedy so incites public reaction that policymakers decide we ought to compensate the victims. 9/11, 11 days after 9/11, Congress passed a law. And the law simply said, anybody who doesn't want to sue, anyone who doesn't want to go to Bernie Siegel's law firm and hire a lawyer and sue the World Trade Center, sue the airlines, sue Massport, sue the Port Authority of New York, sue Boeing, sue the FAA, sue the security guard companies that allowed this horror to happen. Anybody who would rather come in to a taxpayer-funded, no-fault compensation system can do so. You don't have to. You can litigate if you want, but if you'd rather take money right now from a special program designed and administered by one person, President Bush, the Attorney General Ashcroft, Ken Feinberg will do it. You can do it. After the BP oil spill, BP walks into the White House, and they come out with President Obama, and they say, anybody who doesn't want to sue in the Gulf of Mexico for the oil spill, anybody who would rather come into a program to be compensated without lawyers and without lawsuits, come on in. We'll front $20 billion. To do it. And the president has suggested, we agree, we'll let Ken Feinberg do it, and he'll decide which claims are valid and how much money ought to be paid. After the Boston Marathon bombing, the mayor of Boston, Thomas Menino, and the governor of the Commonwealth, Deval Patrick, stand up and they say, we are going to create a special fund. Anybody who voluntarily wants to contribute to this fund, it's a gift. And we've asked Ken Feinberg to come in and design and administer with Camille Byros this program to pay claims. You don't have to, but it's free. You're not giving up your right to sue. It's a gift. Now, in one sense, these programs are very, very different. Notice the difference right off the bat. The 9/11 fund and the BP oil spill fund require you to waive your right to go to court. If you take this money, you take it on condition I will not sue. I don't want to sue anybody. I'll take my money and walk away. Now, the Boston Marathon, Virginia Tech, Aurora, Colorado, Newtown, Connecticut, those programs are very, very different. Those programs are simply vehicles for private donations to come in from all over the country because people watch on TV and decide, this is horrible, we want to give money. And we get that money, we set up a program, and we pay it out. You're not asked to give up your right to sue. You can take that money if you want, hire a lawyer and litigate. That's a gift. That's a gift. And those programs, especially if you're studying them in law school, they are very, very different types of programs. On the one hand, You're giving up your right to litigate. Don't bother getting a lawyer. We're going to give you the money. You're going to sign away your right to sue. And all these others, do whatever you want with the money, including hire a lawyer. Most don't. Most take the money and walk away. But you have the right to if you want to litigate. Now, I think that these programs, so far the ones that we have been involved in, work exactly as intended. Exactly. They are successful efforts to implement policies established by presidents, governors, mayors, judges, etc. They work. They work. If it were that simple, you say. If it were that simple. Because you see, every time you set up one of these programs, brace yourself. Brace yourself for criticism. Brace yourself from very emotional victims who are victims of life's misfortune through no fault of their own, and they are angry, justifiably. They are emotional. They are frustrated. Why me, Mr. Feinberg? A couple of months ago, I went and visited a victim of the Boston Marathon who lost a leg. And he couldn't come to see me, so I went to see him in Spalding Rehab Hospital in Charlestown, Massachusetts. I walk in to his hospital room. There he is, lying in bed with a stump. On his chest is his 9-year-old son. And next to him is his wife, his mother, and his brother. Mr. Jones, I say, we've set up a program, private money you're going to get without any obligation on your part. We're going to give you $1,250,000 tax-free. He looks at me. $1,250,000? I got a better idea, Mr. Feinberg. Keep the money. Give me my leg back. I'll take my leg back. You keep the money. Brace yourself. You will hear that over and over again when you do these programs. Doesn't matter whether it's a public program using taxpayer money or a private program. Brace yourself for the emotional reaction of people who are victims and are innocent victims of misfortune. Now, to give you an example of how this works, the September 11 Victim Compensation Program, which we designed and administered, distributed in 33 months about $8 billion of taxpayer money, not airline money, not World Trade Center money. This was all taxpayer money. The program worked. The average award that we paid for a death claim arising out of 9/11, a little over $2 million tax-free. The average award for a physical injury claim, $400,000 tax-free. By all accounts, the program worked as intended. Only 94 people voluntarily decided we'd rather litigate against the airlines. Only 94, and they all settled their cases within 5 years. There was never a trial on 9/11. They all settled their cases. Only 94 people exercised their right not to litigate. As Camille will explain, we didn't mind. If 94 people wanted to litigate, that was their right under the statute. They had every right to do that. What really bothered us were the two people who did nothing. They refused to come into the fund, and they refused to litigate. They stood and sat on their hands. We visited both of them. One was a priest who lost a brother. Father, take $2 million and set up, give it to Catholic Charities. No, I don't think it's appropriate. Father, you lost your mind? It's $2 million, taxpayer money, it's yours. Fill out the form and in memory of your brother. Nope, wouldn't do it. The other woman was about 77 years old, and I went to see her in Brooklyn. Mrs. Jones, you lost your son. You're going to receive about $3 million tax-free. No, I'm not interested, Mr. Feinberg. You're not interested. Mrs. Jones, in 3 weeks, this program is over. There's $3 million. I'll help you. You sign the form, and I'll help you fill it out. Go away. I lost my son, and you're here to talk to me about money? I left her the application. She never did a thing. Grief can paralyze people. Paralyze them. I felt like hitting her with a baseball bat to get her to sign. You couldn't. She never signed and never litigated either. I don't care if you want to litigate, that's fine. See what grief, we learn what grief can do to people and make them act in what I thought was extremely irrational way with that type of money. So I think that the 9/11 fund, the BP oil spill fund funded by BP's money, these are two perfect examples of successful programs. I think they worked as intended. Don't ever do them again. I don't think you'll ever see these programs again. Ever's a long time, I guess. But let me tell you the ethical problem here that arises. You should have read some of the emails I got when I was administering the 9/11 fund. Dear Mr. Feinberg, my son died in Oklahoma City. Where's my check? Dear Mr. Feinberg, I don't get it. My daughter died in the basement of the World Trade Center in the original 1993 attacks committed by the very same people. Where's my check? And it wasn't just terrorism. Dear Mr. Feinberg, last year, my wife saved 3 little girls from drowning in the Mississippi River, and then she drowned a heroine. Where's my check? You better be careful when you set up very special programs that generously compensate only a few victims of life's misfortune. Everybody else, fend for yourself. But for you people, special treatment. I don't think it sits well. There was no 9/11 fund for Katrina. There was no 9/11 fund for Oklahoma City or for the Hurricane Sandy. There was no 9/11 fund for tornadoes in Alabama. But for 9/11 special. Now, I think it was the right thing to do, the 9/11 fund. I think it exhibited the best in our character. But don't do it again. And it hasn't been done again. And I don't think you'll see it again. Carving out for special treatment just a select few. During BP, we get letters. Dear Mr. Feinberg, I'm following this fund with BP and the $20 billion. Look, I've been waiting for 20 years to get my claim from Exxon Valdez from the oil spill. I still haven't been paid. Why can't I come into the BP oil spill fund? Well, it's only for BP and the Gulf. Well, that doesn't sit well with people. So, now the reason you won't see another BP oil, maybe you will, but the idea that a company is going to front $20 billion before there's even a trial, I don't think you'll see that again. I haven't seen it before or since. Maybe. But 9/11 and BP are very, very rare situations that raise very important ethical issues. about how you decide in a free society among our citizens who should be selected for special treatment when everybody else, it doesn't work. Now, when you pay people, I want to explain, most of you will appreciate this. When you decide to pay people, whether it's a 9/11 fund or a BP oil spill or Newtown, Connecticut, or the Boston Marathon, it doesn't matter in this sense. When you pay people, you have to make two very, very difficult decisions. And the second is much more difficult than the first. The first decision you have to make: who gets how much? Who's eligible? And how much are you going to pay them? You've been delegated this authority to decide you are eligible, you're not eligible, and maybe you're eligible. Now, how do you decide who and how much? Well, how much money do you have? I mean, what drives these programs is how much money do you have to distribute. In the Boston Marathon, we were astounded. Virginia Tech, we had 7 million. Aurora, Colorado, 5 million. Those poor kids who died in the first grade in Newtown, Connecticut, all private money coming in from around the country, 11 million. The Boston Marathon, 60 million. 60 from over 100,000 donors, voluntary, private money from all over the country. I am amazed, constantly amazed, at the charitable impulse of the American people. I am constantly amazed at it. So you've got $60 million. Now, who's eligible? 4 who died, their families, double amputees, single amputees, people who are who spent weeks and weeks in hospitals in Boston, all eligible. But wait a minute now. We're trying to determine who's eligible. What about people injured who went to the hospital and were sent home? No overnight hospitalization. Well, we have enough money. Let's include them. We'll decide, like Solomon, eligible. What about people who witnessed the tragedy and have mental trauma with no physical injury? Nope. We don't have enough money. If we start paying everybody who witnessed this on Boylston Street in Boston, everybody will get $1.67. You can't do it that way. Based on the amount of money we have, no mental trauma is compensable. Don't even apply. We're not going to pay it. Well, that's not fair. Who's talking about fair? There's no fair. That word doesn't come up in what we do. There's no fair. This is rough justice. What's fair about people who are killed, innocent victims watching a marathon? Well, what about those store owners on Boylston Street? They had to shut down. They couldn't work for 2 weeks. Lost income. Nope, ineligible. Not enough money. So the first thing you have to decide is who's eligible and how much are they going to get so that you don't distribute all of the pot that's available in a haphazard way and it doesn't have an impact. So that's always the first ethical issue. Taking an aggregate amount of money and allocating it. Death, double amputation, single amputation, 30 days in the hospital, 3 weeks in the hospital, 2 weeks in the hospital, 1 week, etc. But that's 30% of the problem. The other problem in all of these cases, everybody counts other people's money, you see. Everybody counts other people's money. Mr. Feinberg, you're giving me $2 million in 9/11. You're giving my next door neighbor $3 million. What do you have against my dead wife? Why are you denigrating the memory of my wife by giving me $1 million less than my next door neighbor? Well, your next door neighbor made more money and blah, blah, so there's more economic loss. Spare me those arguments. Why? Why, Mr. Feinberg? I'm suffering enough and you're giving me $1 million less than my next door neighbor. It's a problem. It's a problem. Not only is vertical equity a problem, horizontal equity is a big problem in all of these cases, because people are looking next door to see what the next door neighbor got. That's one problem. Another problem you run into in all of these cases, problems of proof. Mr. Feinberg, I couldn't fish in the Gulf of Mexico and I lost $100,000. Pay me. Well, Mr. Jones, how do I know you lost $100,000? Well, we do things with a handshake down here. Well, you may do things with a handshake, but the integrity of this program will not allow me to pay you without proof. Do you have a tax return? No. Okay. What else do you have? Do you have a checkbook? Yeah, here it is. And profit and loss statements? Do you have some here? And some trip tickets to show that you went fishing here? Okay. We're going to send you a check for $100,000. Now, with it, you're going to get a 1099. I am? I waive it. You can't waive a 1099. We've got to send you the IRS. It's a 1099. You can't waive it? No. Rip up the check. I'm withdrawing my claim. You're withdrawing a claim for $100,000 because you're going to get a rip it up. He probably never paid taxes in his life. And he wouldn't take the money. That happened over and over and over again in the Gulf of Mexico. It happened over and over again. So there are problems of proof in all of these cases, you see. And you're battered and buffeted over how you can try and get compensation out consistent with what policymakers in Washington want you to do. And at the same time, do it in a manner that is principled. I don't say fair, because in all of these programs, if you say to me, how do you prepare yourself to do this? First of all, brace yourself. Brace yourself. Don't expect, and you never will get, never will you receive, thank you, gratitude, appreciation. It won't happen. And you can't expect it to happen, you see. These are people who are innocent victims, almost always traumatically, their lives traumatically changed in an instant, overnight. 9/11, you say goodbye to your husband, your wife, your son, your daughter. They never come home. They never come home. Incinerated. Never see them again. Do you know, when we administered the 9/11 fund for 33 months, do you know what was the single most volatile reason for emotional, distraught people when they came and see me? If you said to me, Mr. Feinberg, when you see these folks who lost loved ones on 9/11, what is the single reason that triggers their emotional response to all of this? You know what it is? The absence of a body. The absence of a body. The number of people who came to see me and said, Mr. Feinberg, I lost my wife, and there's not even a body to visit at the cemetery. And if you try and explain, look, Mr. Jones, there's the memory of a life. The memory is what's important, and the love of your family. And hollow. No body. That would drive victims to distraction, weeping and wailing when they came to see me. Now, I'm asked all the time in all of these matters, what is the most difficult aspect of designing and administering these programs? The answer is, you offer to meet with any individual claimant that wants to come and see me. During the 9/11 Fund, we saw 900 individual families and victims who were either lost loved ones on 9/11 or who were physically, mostly burn victims. During the Boston Marathon, about a dozen people wanted individually to meet with me. Now, when people come to see me, it is chilling. It is traumatic, and you cannot ever prepare yourself for the stories you're going to hear. So when you learn when you do these programs, be prepared. Be prepared for the amazing and the unanticipated. Nobody comes to talk to you ever about money. No one wants to talk to me about money. That's all preordained. There's protocols, there's rules. People know what they're going to receive. They come to validate the memory of a lost loved one. They want to vent about life's unfairness. Camille knows that during the 9/11 Fund, we filled up a whole entire room with memorabilia from people. Ribbons, diplomas, medals, photographs, videos. Lady comes to see me, 24 years old, 9/11. We gave anybody who wanted a hearing the right to come and see me. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband. He was a fireman, and he left us with he left me with our two children, 6 and 4. Now you're going to give me $2.2 million. I want it in 30 days. Well, Mrs. Jones, I will try, but we got to go through processes at Treasury and cut the check. No! You got 30 days to get me that money. Mrs. Jones, why do you need the money in 30 days? Why? I'll tell you why. I have terminal cancer. I have 10 weeks to live. My husband was going to survive me and take care of our 2 children. Now they're going to be orphans. I need this money, Mr. Feinberg. I got to set up this trust fund because I have only a few more weeks where I have all my faculties. I've got to do this fast. We got her the money. 8 weeks later, she died. You can't make these stories up. You can't make them up. And you try as best you can to avoid mistakes, but we're human. And when we empathize with victims, you're guaranteed every time you do one of these programs, you will make a mistake. 71-year-old man comes to see me after 9/11, and he says, Mr. Feinberg, I lost my son at the Pentagon. When the plane hit, he got out safely, but he thought his sister was trapped. So he went back in to look for his sister. She had escaped through a side door. He died looking for her. Mr. Feinberg, my life is over. I'm only here to tell you this, but it doesn't matter how much money you give. My life is, without my son, it's over. It's over. I look at him, dope that I am. I say to him, Mr. Jones, this is terrible. I know how you feel. looks at me like, what did you just say? He looks back at me and he says, nice man, Mr. Feinberg, you have a very difficult job, really. I don't envy what you have to do. I have some advice. Don't ever tell somebody you know how they feel. Mr. Feinberg, you have no idea how I feel. And I think when you meet with families, you shouldn't say something like that. I just want you to know. I'll never do that again. I'll never make that mistake again. You're dealing with people. A law degree is helpful when we're designing these programs. But once you administer them, better to have a divinity degree or a degree from JTS or a degree in psychiatry, because you're dealing with people who are emotionally distraught. And you better be prepared. When people come to see me, they'll do something like this every time. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my wife. We were married for 25 years. And I'd like to start off my hearing by showing you a video of our wedding 25 years ago. Well, Mr. Jones, you don't have to show me that. It'll have no bearing on compensation, and I want you to watch, my angel. I want you to see what those murderers did. Show the video. Show the video. I lost my son. He was 31 years old. He was working at Cantor Fitzgerald. I want to show you a video of his bar mitzvah when he was 13. Watch. Isn't he great? Look how great a job. He's gone now. I just want you to know that it was a real human being. I want you to understand. I want you to appreciate. That's the toughest part of the job, you see. That's what keeps you up at 3 a.m. Now, there is a slant to this that is particularly worthwhile discussing for a minute in this audience, because I'm asked a very difficult question. All the time I'm asked this question. How do you manage to get through this? How do you maintain some degree of professional objectivity? How do you vindicate the confidence that President Bush in 9/11 or President Obama in BP or Mayor Menino in Boston Marathon, how do you manage to meet people like this and not lose your mind with this horror in giving out the money? What is there in your background that reinforces your resolve to do the job and do it right? People ask me that all the time. Now, I have a couple of answers to that. First, what I do, what Camille Byros does, what our staff do, is not rocket science. People in this audience could do exactly what we do. You try saying no to the President of the United States, or you try doing it in a cavalier way when people have designated you and asked you to do it. So you better do it. As President Obama said to me, we've got people manning the front lines in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and it's great if you can do this BP fund. I personally would appreciate it. I personally want you to do this. Well, no, I'm busy. You can't. So that's one thing. It's not rocket science. It's sort of doing the job, hunkering down and acting like the professional that you are. But I think in my case, at least, I can tell you there are two aspects of my background that have made it easier for me to do this. Now, everything's relative. I got to tell you, when you hold 7, 8, 9 hearings a day, where one victim is more emotional than another, I don't care what your background is, you better take a break and walk around the park and take a walk on a sunny day and have an ice cream cone and sit in the park and watch kids playing on a slide somewhere or in a playground, because otherwise you'll lose your mind. People say, well, I mean, when you meet these families, does it have an impact on your professional objectivity? I'll say it does. If you don't have a heart of stone, it's going to have an impact on your professional objectivity. But you hunker down to do the best you can. But I think in my personal case, I can't speak for anybody else who works on these programs, but I do think there are two aspects of my upbringing that I think help explain my willingness to do this and my ability to get through it. First, you must remember, I grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts, after World War II, as part of a very tight-knit Jewish community in Brockton. And most Brocktonians, during those optimistic 1950s and early 1960s, believed very strongly in the communitarian ethic. The notion that we're all in this together, and that you can advance as far as your own individual skills and outlooks and priorities will allow, knowing that the community is there to support you. It didn't hurt that at that time the president was John F. Kennedy, a fair son of Massachusetts, urging all of us to give back to the country and to help each other. And that was a very different time and a very optimistic time, where I believe much of my value system in terms of the public interest in giving back, in helping your fellow citizens, was molded in part by this notion of community and President Kennedy. I note with some sadness and frustration that in 2 weeks is the 50th anniversary of President Kennedy's death, and I think it's a good time to pause and reflect on what he meant and what the message that he instilled in terms of communitarianism and the notion that you can give something to your fellow citizens in the community, and that we will help each other in that regard. Second, my Jewish upbringing. Now, I was not a devout Jew. In Brockton, Mass., we had our 3 synagogues, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative. We all went to Hebrew school. We all celebrated the holidays. But I did learn, and I continue to learn every day, about how American Jews grieve and mourn, and how, with Judaism, and I can't explain it the way that the Chancellor would, or some of you could, but I've been to enough sad moments in my Jewish life to know that grieving in Judaism is a communitarian thing. It is the community rallying around the mourner. I'm not just talking about Shiva. I'm talking about all the lessons I've learned about mourners tearing cloth, covering mirrors, grieving together, sitting around the body waiting for burial, the communal effort at the actual burial ceremony. Think about it. I've often thought about how in Judaism, how easier mourning is made through the community rallying around the victim and around the loved ones who have lost somebody. And how Judaism says that it is an obligation not to grieve alone. That the communitarian ethic that I think is so important to my upbringing is reinforced by this notion that particularly in times of grief and mourning, the community has an obligation to come to the rescue in so many different ways. And as one noted Jewish theologian put it, do we have to be alone in our grief? For American Jews, grieving does not have to happen in the corner. In fact, Judaism almost insists that grieving be a public, shared process, and a process that gets the community's full attention and full participation front and center. And he concludes, example after example showcase how Judaism sets forth clear directives mandating community involvement in nearly all aspects of death and mourning. The ultimate lesson is that the dead lived a life interrelated with the living, and that individual loss is interrelated with community life. Now, I couldn't articulate it that way, but I must say, I think there's an awful lot of truth to that. Truth not only in doctrinal terms, but truth in terms of how Judaism impacts you when you're giving these assignments to try and compensate. So those are some of the, that's maybe a bit of a long-winded way for me to try and explain to this sophisticated crowd how, I guess, my son may have a different view, how I guess one gets through these traumatic examples. So that is sort of a Bernard Segal lecture. I'm sure if Mr. Segal was here, he'd have some gloss on what I've said, probably with a story or two of his own. But I must say I am honored to be part of this wonderful endowed lecture series. I am honored indeed to be asked to be part of this great institution with its international reputation. And we do have 10 minutes or so for questions. And I want to thank everybody for the honor of my being here. Thank you very much.